At 2:15 a.m. on August 1st, 1943, Private First Class Harry McMillan pressed himself into the wet mud of his foxhole on New Georgia, staring into the black wall of jungle just 50 yards away. The air was thick, humid, smelling of rot and unspent ammunition. He wasn't listening for footsteps or breaking branches. Those sounds came too late. He was listening for the moment the jungle went silent. That silence meant the Japanese were coming. And when they came, it would be a human tidal wave designed to overwhelm everything in its path. His company, Charlie Company of the 148th Infantry, was guarding the southern perimeter of Munda Airfield, the key to the entire Solomon Islands campaign. Intelligence of the Japanese were planning a massive pre-dawn assault to push the exhausted Americans straight into the sea. McMillan's foxhole sat at a narrow, vulnerable choke point near the Matnaco River tributary, a spot every officer knew was a weakness in the line. The rifle resting on his sandbag wasn't the weapon he was supposed to have. Every other man in his company carried the M1 Garand, the 8-round semi-automatic hammer that fired the powerful .30-06 cartridge. The Garand was a weapon of industrial war, designed for volume and reliability. It was loud, heavy, and absolutely lethal. But McMillan's rifle was different. It was a bolt-action Winchester Model 54 chambered in .220 Swift, a rifle his commanding officer had called a toy and his platoon sergeant had mockingly dubbed the Varmint rifle. The name stuck, and it wasn't meant as a compliment. The mockery had started weeks earlier on the transport ship heading into the Pacific. Every man was cleaning his M1, the smooth action reassuring in its military precision. McMillan was carefully disassembling his Winchester, a rifle he'd saved up for and modified himself back in Illinois. The armorer walked past and stopped dead. "What the hell is that, Private?" the armorer grunted, pointing at the slender rifle and the small, high-velocity rounds. "You planning on shooting groundhogs or Japanese?" McMillan explained it was a Winchester Model 54 chambered in .220 Swift, built for long-distance target shooting and varmint hunting back home. The armorer laughed, a wet, ugly sound that drew attention from the surrounding squad. "Varmint rifle, huh? Son, you're not hunting prairie dogs. You're going up against men who fight with fixed bayonets. That little mouse gun won't even tickle them." The .220 Swift was technically the fastest factory-made cartridge in the world, designed for a single purpose: speed. The tiny 48-grain bullet exited the barrel at over 4,000 feet per second, a blistering supersonic blur. Compared to the Garand's heavy .30-06 round, the .220 Swift was an absolute specialist. It was a scalpel where the Garand was a sledgehammer. The problem, as every expert understood, was that scalpel rounds had a critical flaw in jungle warfare. They had no stopping power. The experts, the hardened veterans, the weapons training officers all agreed. In dense jungle where engagements happened at under 100 yards, you needed mass and momentum. You needed a heavy bullet that could smash through thick vines, small branches, and layers of soaking wet gear. The .220 Swift, with its light construction and high speed, was known to tumble and disintegrate if it hit anything harder than paper. Captain Henderson called McMillan into his bunker. He didn't yell. He simply looked at McMillan with the dead eyes of a man who'd seen too much. "Private, I appreciate your enthusiasm. I hear you're an expert shot, state champion back in the States. But you're carrying a bolt-action rifle with a 5-round magazine, and every other man has an 8-round semi-automatic Garand. You have to work the bolt for every shot. You are slowing down the total volume of fire for this company. You will leave the sporting rifle in the supply tent and carry the standard-issue M1. Is that understood?" McMillan saluted. "Yes, sir." He left the captain's bunker, walked straight back to his tent, and promptly hid the Garand under his bedroll. He kept the Winchester. McMillan knew something the officers didn't. The war in the Pacific wasn't just about fire volume. It was about precision and shock. The .30-06 round killed by punching a clean hole through a man. The victim often had time to yell, pull a grenade pin, or launch into a final terrifying charge. McMillan was operating on a different theory. When a bullet travels at over 4,000 feet per second, it creates hydrostatic shock. It hits the body with such kinetic force that tissue doesn't just tear, it explodes in an outward shock wave, creating a wound cavity many times larger than the bullet itself. It was like being hit by an internal bomb. The speed meant instantaneous lights out. No movement, no screaming, no final gesture, just collapse. The fastest rifle in the world, he reasoned, could stop a Banzai charge faster than the heaviest machine gun. He spent the last 48 hours before the expected assault preparing alone. He wasn't cleaning cosmoline like other men. He was hand-loading his 50 precious rounds of .220 Swift. These weren't factory military rounds. They were hollow-point hunting bullets modified for maximum expansion. They were designed to dump all their energy into the target in the most violent way possible. He wrapped the bolt assembly in thin oilcloth to keep humidity out. He checked the trigger, tuned back home to brake clean at 3 pounds. He checked the custom scope, a low-magnification optic already fogging in the jungle mist. He kept the bolt impossibly smooth, lubricating it with special light oil that wouldn't gum up in heat. His entire defensive plan consisted of a single 5-round magazine and the ability to work the bolt faster than any man in a regiment. His 5 shots had to be 5 kills before the enemy could close the distance. He had to be a human wall. At 0230, the waiting ended, not with a shout, but with a sound more terrifying. The jungle going silent. The bugs, the frogs, the constant hiss of the tropics. It all stopped, as if someone had flicked a massive switch. The Japanese were moving into position, close enough to silence the whole world. McMillan didn't wait for orders. He pushed slightly higher in the foxhole, resting the thin barrel on the muddy sandbag. He scanned the dense black curtain through his scope, focusing on a massive banyan tree marking the center of the expected assault corridor. He controlled his breathing, a technique learned from years of competitive marksmanship in Illinois. 1 heartbeat, 1 sight picture, 1 dead man. He saw movement, a shadow moving low and fast along the ground. A Japanese scout, 30 yards ahead of the main force, probing for weak points. Distance, exactly 180 yards. The scout paused, a dark shape against slightly less dark background. McMillan didn't breathe. The reticle settled on the center of the scout's chest. The custom trigger snapped with a whisper. The .220 Swift round left the barrel traveling, so fast it was silent until it struck. The scout simply disappeared, vaporized by impact. No sound, no cry, no warning to the man behind him. Just a heavy, soft thud as the body dropped into undergrowth. The silence returned, but angrier now. The enemy knew they'd been spotted, but couldn't understand how. McMillan worked the bolt. The spent brass ejected into mud with a gentle clink. 4 rounds left in the magazine. He was alone, outnumbered, armed with a rifle everyone had laughed at, and he just killed the advanced scout for a battalion-sized Banzai charge. When the main assault came, it would be the moment he'd either be vindicated as a genius or torn apart as a fool. The death of the scout changed everything, but it didn't stop the inevitable. The Japanese commander knew what that single silent shot meant. The American line was awake. He wouldn't hesitate. He'd simply launch the assault immediately. McMillan chambered the next round. He was ready. At 3 a.m., the jungle exploded. It wasn't a stealthy advance. It was a hurricane of sound and fury, a collective primal scream rising from the trees and washing over the American perimeter. The Banzai charge. Hundreds of Japanese infantrymen screaming, bayonets fixed, surging through thick vegetation. Their goal, use sheer momentum and terror to overwhelm defenders before they could organize. The Garens and .30 caliber machine guns of Charlie Company opened up in a roaring chorus, throwing massive volumes of lead into the charging darkness. Tracers zipped across 50 yards like deadly glowing insects. But volume wasn't stopping the charge. The Japanese were trained to take a hit and keep running. The charge was gaining speed, a living, desperate wave aimed squarely at McMillan's position. McMillan didn't panic. The screaming, the rattling gunfire, all became background noise. His world narrowed to the sight picture in his scope and the impossibly smooth action of his Winchester. He wasn't an infantryman holding position. He was a machine of precision, and he was about to prove his Varmint rifle was the most effective man-stopper on the island. His first target, the command structure. The assault would be led by officers carrying swords and shouting orders. Their presence was essential to keep the charge from dissolving. McMillan had to sever the head from the snake. The charge was at 300 yards, still 100 yards from the main American line. McMillan found his target, a shape ahead of the rest, tall, moving with unnatural speed. An officer, the faint glint of a polished sword barely visible. McMillan took a breath. The trigger broke clean. The shot, traveling at over 4,000 feet per second, hit the officer with force utterly disproportionate to the bullet's size. The man didn't slow or stagger. He simply stopped existing as a coherent organism. Hydrostatic shock shattered his internal structure, flipping him backward out of the charge path with violent finality. The sudden immediate death of their leader, without sound, without cry, just catastrophic collapse, caused a ripple of confusion. Men following him hesitated, unsure if he tripped or stepped on a mine. McMillan was already working the bolt. He didn't confirm the kill. He didn't need to. The bolt moved back, throwing the spent casing into mud, driving the next round home with mechanical precision. Next target, the heavy weapons. 2 Japanese soldiers moving right were carrying a Type 92 heavy machine gun. If they set that gun up, they'd rake the American foxholes and end the defense in seconds. Distance, 250 yards. Shot 2. The bullet struck the lead gunner instantly. The man crumpled. The heavy gun fell, its legs splayed in mud. Before the second gunner could react, McMillan was moving. Shot 3. The second gunner, bending to recover the weapon, was eliminated just as fast. 2 shots, 2 kills. The most dangerous immediate threat disabled, lying in mud as useless steel. Total time for 3 kills, less than 4 seconds. McMillan was shooting faster than many men could shoot a semi-automatic. As targets were dropping with catastrophic finality the heavy Garand rounds couldn't match. But the Banzai charge wasn't slowing. The noise was deafening. Confusion on the right flank was being absorbed by relentless pressure of troops behind them. They pushed on, bayonets flashing, driven by fanaticism and desperation. Distance, shrinking rapidly past 200 yards. McMillan saw 3 men trying to drag the crippled machine gun from mud. A salvage team trying to bring the weapon back. He had 1 round left in the magazine. He couldn't get all 3, but he had to stop the recovery. Shot 4. The round hit the central soldier, instantly vaporizing the recovery team's formation. His 2 partners recoiled in shock, unable to comprehend the invisible deadly force picking them off with surgical precision. McMillan didn't give them time. His left thumb shoved 5 more rounds, his second magazine, into the open breech. He used a technique learned at Camp Perry, pushing high-velocity rounds down and guiding the bolt home in a fluid, seamless motion. Clink-crack, magazine full, bolt closed, Winchester loaded. The 2 remaining soldiers, realizing the threat came from a fixed, devastatingly accurate position, dove for cover. Shot 5. The soldier closest to cover vanished into undergrowth. McMillan had killed 6 men, 5 with a bolt-action rifle in less than 30 seconds. He'd neutralized the entire heavy weapons team. The charge was still 180 yards away. He was a single man who created a wall of impossible, immediate death. But the enemy was adapting. The remaining troops fanned out, using dense jungle canopy for cover. They were trained to counter machine gun fire, but had no doctrine for countering a single insane rifleman firing supersonic bullets. The charge morphed from a wave into broken, rapidly moving skirmish lines. They were no longer charging his front. They were trying to flank him using thick cover of banyan trees. Distance, down to 150 yards. He could hear their breathing, the heavy clink of gear hitting trees. He shifted focus to the left flank, a rifle barrel passing behind a thick mangrove root. The soldier was moving fast, trying to bypass the line of bodies he created. Shot 6. The round hit through the root. Risky shot, betting the .220 Swift's speed would carry through light wood. The round fragmented, but the core was enough. The soldier spun and dropped, creating momentary hesitation in movement behind him. McMillan's hands were slick with sweat and mud, but the bolt moved flawlessly. The smell of hot powder was thick. 7 men dead. The enemy's response was immediate. They found his position and opened fire with Arisakas, heavy rounds smashing into sandbags. Dirt and stone fragments sprayed over his helmet, burning his eyes. The impact was deafening. He pressed into the bottom of the foxhole, Winchester tight against his chest, waiting for the lull. The Japanese thought they'd pinned him down. They thought they'd neutralized the threat. They didn't understand the man with the Varmint rifle. McMillan waited 3 heartbeats. Arisaka fired ripping sandbags above his head. Then he moved, not back, but up, swinging the Winchester toward enemy fire, eyes searching for muzzle flash. Distance, 30 yards. He didn't rise. He slowly pushed the barrel through a gap between sandbags. Keeping his head down, I fixed the scope, looking through a narrow keyhole into the rising wave. First man, moving in low crouch, rifle high, searching for movement. Too close, too confident. He paused to check the foxhole corner. Mistake. Shot 8. The trigger broke silently. The supersonic round hit shoulder and neck. The soldier dropped without sound, rifle skittering across mud. The instant stop, absolute silence of the kill, was terrifying to the man behind him. McMillan worked the bolt in pure muscle memory, fluid and fast. He didn't wait for reaction. He swung right toward urgent whispering. Second man, moving into firing position, trying to flank. Shot 9. Round hit chest. Catastrophic result. Tiny hypervelocity bullet tore him apart from inside, dropping him instantly. 2 shots. 9 kills total. A visible pile of bodies now. The charge had been brought to complete. Terrifying halt directly in front of his foxhole. Japanese soldiers behind the first line, seeing comrades obliterated by invisible force, stopped dead. The roar of Banzai charge replaced by uncertain gasping silence, broken only by distant thump of American mortars. McMillan had stopped the charge faster than a heavy machine gun nest. The enemy was stalled, but still there, still close enough to throw grenades or rush in final desperation. He had to turn momentary victory into permanent rout. 3 rounds left. The next threat wouldn't be frontal. They'd try explosives. He scanned trees, searching for a soldier preparing to throw. He saw it. Flash of dull metal near the banyan tree. 40 yards out, a soldier pulling the pin on a fragmentation grenade, preparing to lob it into his foxhole. Moving priority target. Time available, less than 1 second. McMillan aimed slightly ahead, predicting the trajectory of the man's arm as he cocked back. Shot 10. The round, placed with impossible precision, hit arm and shoulder as he prepared to throw. Impact so violent the soldier's body snapped backward, grenade dropping harmlessly into mud. It exploded a second later, useless concussive burst that harmed no one. The absolute surgical violence and the detonation was too much. The remnants of the assault force, realizing the man in the foxhole wasn't just a rifleman, but a supernatural force of destruction, stopped fighting and started scattering. Screams of Banzai charge turned to frantic shouts of retreat. McMillan, breathing hard but in control, worked the bolt, chambering his final round. 3 soldiers scrambling backward, abandoning cover, running for their lives. He couldn't let them retreat and regroup. They had to understand. The price of charging this line was death. Immediate and absolute. Shot 11. He chose the last man, furthest runner, aiming for base of spine. The .220 swift struck with devastating finality. Runner went down, immobilized. Shot 12. He swung to the second man, cutting through undergrowth. Clean miss. Slight deflection off a vine. The bullet tumbled harmlessly. McMillan cursed under his breath. His only lapse in concentration. 1 round left. He found the last target. Soldier diving behind fallen coconut log. McMillan aimed low, betting on deflection, off wet ground beneath the log. Shot 13. Round struck mud, sending plume of water and dirt upward. The man didn't move, either hit or completely pinned. The battlefield fell into stunned silence. Distant Garand still firing on flanks. Mortars continuing their work. But in McMillan's sector, the fight was over. The charge had broken. The jungle swallowed the remnants, leaving behind a terrifying, silent mound of immediate death in the mud. McMillan lowered the Winchester, barrel smoking. He slowly stood, pushing sandbags aside, covered in mud, sweat, and dirt, but completely unharmed. He'd used one magazine, 13 rounds total, to break a battalion-sized Banzai charge at the most vulnerable point of the American line. From opening shot on the scout to the moment the last soldier scattered, less than 5 minutes. He looked down the line. Bodies falling exactly where high-velocity rounds hit them. No final lunge. No scream. The effect of the .220 Swift was total and immediate, a clean shutdown of the human machine. He saw piles of spent Garand brass from neighboring foxholes, evidence of enormous fire volume. He'd fired 13 rounds. They'd fired hundreds. But the charge only broke where the Varmint rifle created its wall of instant annihilation. Faint gray dawn filtered through jungle canopy. McMillan felt profound, chilling silence settle over him. Physically fine, emotionally drained, he ejected the single unspent round, catching it in his palm, and sat hard in mud.